Rome, 69 AD. The city that ruled the world was drowning in chaos. Emperor Nero, the tyrant who murdered his mother, burned Rome and sang while Christians burned as human torches, was dead. Driven to suicide by rebellious legions, his death ended the Julio-Claudian dynasty that had ruled for nearly a century. The throne was empty, and Rome discovered a terrifying truth. Without a clear successor, the empire became a prize for anyone strong enough to seize it. Within months, 4 men would claim the purple. 3 would die violently. The year of the 4 emperors had begun, and the second emperor to fall would die not on a battlefield, but in a palace bathroom, butchered by the very soldiers who had crowned him. His name was Galba, and his reign lasted just 7 months. The old man who inherited a nightmare. Servius Sulpicius Galba was 73 years old when the Roman legions in Spain proclaimed him emperor in 68 AD. He was a senator, a general, a man of the old republic, stern, disciplined, famously cheap with money and brutal with discipline. When news reached him that Nero had committed suicide and the Senate had declared him emperor, Galba didn't celebrate. He understood what Rome had become, a military dictatorship where emperors were made and unmade by soldiers loyal only to whoever paid them most. Galba marched toward Rome with his legions, promising reform, fiscal responsibility, and a return to traditional Roman values. The Senate welcomed him, the people cheered, but the Praetorian Guard, those kingmakers who had sold the empire before, watched him with cold calculation. They wanted their bonuses. Galba refused to pay. In his first public address, Galba declared, "I choose my soldiers, I do not buy them." It was a principled statement. It was also a death sentence. The conspiracy in the shadows. While Galba tried to restore order, a younger, more ambitious man was plotting in the darkness. Marcus Salvius Otho had been Nero's friend, companion in debauchery, and husband to Poppaea Sabina, until Nero fell in love with her and exiled Otho to distant Lusitania. For 10 years, Otho had governed a backwater province, nursing his hatred and waiting. When Galba marched on Rome, Otho joined him, playing the loyal supporter. But he expected gratitude. He expected adoption as heir. He expected the throne. Galba chose someone else. In January 69 AD, the old emperor publicly adopted Lucius Calpurnius Piso Licianus, a young aristocrat of impeccable lineage and 0 experience. Piso was everything Galba valued: noble birth, moral character, traditional values. He was also politically worthless. The legions didn't know him, the Praetorians didn't respect him, and Otho, who had supported Galba, financed his march, and expected reward, had been humiliated. Otho decided Galba had to die. The bribe that bought an empire. Otho moved quickly. He visited the Praetorian barracks in secret, meeting with soldiers who already despised Galba's refusal to pay bonuses. He whispered promises: gold, land, power, everything Galba had denied them. The Praetorians listened. They remembered that just 76 years earlier, their predecessors had auctioned Rome itself. Why serve an emperor who treated them like servants when they could crown a generous master? On the morning of January 15, 69 AD, just 7 months into Galba's reign, Otho made his move. Galba was preparing to sacrifice at the Temple of Apollo. The ceremony was meant to bring divine favor. Instead, it became a slaughterhouse. As Galba stood before the altar, rumors swept through the crowd. The Praetorians have proclaimed Otho emperor. Panic erupted. Citizens fled. Senators scattered. Galba, old and confused, tried to return to the palace. His attendants placed him in a sedan chair and carried him through the chaos, but the Praetorians were already hunting him. Death in the Forum. They found him near the Lacus Curtius, in the heart of the Roman Forum, the sacred center of the city, where orators spoke and laws were proclaimed. The Praetorians surrounded the emperor's chair. Galba's Germanic bodyguards tried to defend him, but they were outnumbered and quickly cut down. The old emperor stepped from the sedan, pulled his toga around himself, and, according to ancient sources, offered his neck to the blade. "Strike, if it be for the good of Rome," he reportedly said. They struck. Multiple soldiers stabbed him. His body fell onto the stones of the Forum. One Praetorian severed his head and carried it to Otho as proof of death. Others mutilated the corpse, kicking it, spitting on it, treating Rome's emperor like a slaughtered animal. Galba's reign was over. Otho's had begun, and Rome had proven once again that imperial power belonged to whoever could pay the soldiers or kill the competition first. But Otho's triumph would be short-lived, because on the Rhine frontier, another general had just heard about Galba's murder, and Vitellius was marching south with 8 legions, hungry, loyal, and ready to take what Otho had stolen. Marcus Salvius Otho sat on the throne of Rome, wearing purple robes still warm from Galba's corpse. He had bought the empire with promises of gold. He had seized power through assassination. And now, just days into his reign, he received news that turned his victory into a nightmare. The Rhine legions had proclaimed their own emperor. His name was Aulus Vitellius, a gluttonous, cruel general who commanded 8 battle-hardened legions forged in constant warfare against Germanic tribes. While Otho had bribed palace gods, Vitellius commanded real soldiers. While Otho played politics in Rome, Vitellius had spent years earning his troops' loyalty through blood and shared suffering. And now those legions were marching south to take what they believed was rightfully theirs. The race for Italy. Otho understood immediately. Rome didn't care who wore the purple. Rome cared who controlled the legions, and Vitellius had more soldiers, better generals, and troops who had fought together for years. Otho had the Praetorian Guard, overpaid, undisciplined palace soldiers who had never faced a real army. He had some Italian levies hastily recruited and barely trained, and he had perhaps 3 months before Vitellius reached Italy. He needed a miracle. Instead, he got Betrayal. In April 69 AD, Otho's forces met Vitellius's army near the small town of Betrayal in northern Italy. It wasn't a battle, it was a slaughter. The Praetorians, those arrogant kingmakers who had murdered emperors and auctioned empires, discovered what real soldiers looked like. Vitellius's Rhine legions smashed through Otho's lines with terrifying efficiency. Veterans who had fought Germans in forests and mud tore apart the palace guards who had grown soft on Roman luxuries. By nightfall, Otho's army was destroyed. Thousands lay dead. Survivors fled in every direction. The emperor who chose death. When news of the defeat reached Otho at his headquarters in Betrayal, his officers expected him to flee, to rally more troops, to fight on. Some ancient sources claim he still had forces available, that the war wasn't lost. But Otho had seen enough. He understood that continuing the war meant more Roman blood spilled in civil conflict. He had lived his entire life as a hedonist, a pleasure seeker, a man of ambition without principle. In death, he finally found dignity. On April 16, 69 AD, after ruling for just 90 days, Otho gathered his household, said farewell to his friends, and retired to his quarters. He spent the evening writing letters, burning correspondence that might endanger his supporters. Then he took a dagger and drove it into his own chest. When servants found him the next morning, he was dead, killed by his own hand, sparing Rome further bloodshed. Soldiers who had served him wept. Some threw themselves on funeral pyres rather than serve another emperor. Even his enemies admitted surprise. The man who had murdered his way to power had died with unexpected honor. But Rome had no time for mourning. Vitellius was coming. The glutton takes the throne. Aulus Vitellius entered Rome in July 69 AD, not as a liberator, but as a conqueror. His troops occupied the city, his generals took command of key positions, and Vitellius himself settled into the palace and began what ancient historians described as the most grotesque reign in Roman history. Vitellius was obsessed with food, banquets lasting from noon till midnight, exotic delicacies shipped from across the empire. Ancient sources claim he vomited between courses so he could continue eating, a disgusting display of imperial excess while Rome burned with civil war. But Vitellius's real crime wasn't gluttony, it was incompetence. While he feasted, the Eastern legions, the massive armies stationed in Syria, Judea, and Egypt, had been watching, and they decided Rome needed a different emperor. On July 1st, 69 AD, the legions in Egypt proclaimed Titus Flavius Vespasian as emperor. Within days, the Syrian legions joined, then the Danubian legions. Suddenly, Vitellius, who had seemed invincible just months earlier, faced the largest military coalition in Roman history. The year of the four emperors was about to reach its bloody climax. The final emperor falls. By December 69 AD, Vespasian's forces reached Rome. Vitellius's support collapsed, his legions deserted, his generals fled. The emperor who had marched into Rome as a conqueror now cowered in the palace, trying desperately to negotiate surrender. The Flavian soldiers found him hiding in the palace, dressed in filthy clothes, trying to pass as a servant. They dragged him through the streets of Rome, the same streets where Galba had been murdered, where Otho had seized power, where Vitellius himself had celebrated victory. The mob pelted him with filth. Soldiers tortured him, mocked him, forced him to watch as they destroyed everything he had built. Then they killed him, slowly, brutally, publicly. His body was thrown into the Tiber River like garbage. Vespasian became the fourth emperor of 69 AD, and unlike the others, he would survive. The Archive War Verdict. The year of the four emperors exposed Rome's fatal weakness. The throne belonged not to law, not to senate, not to divine right, but to whoever commanded the most legions. Galba tried to rule with principle and died for his refusal to pay bribes. Otho bought power with murder and ended it with suicide. Vitellius conquered with armies and fell when bigger armies arrived. Only Vespasian, practical, ruthless, experienced, understood the new reality and founded a dynasty that would last decades. 69 AD taught Rome a lesson written in blood. Emperors were no longer chosen by gods or senate. They were made by soldiers, and they could be unmade just as easily.